Um, we're moving on now to the presidential address given by Dr. Elliot Cohen. Let's see. Dr. Cohen is the principal founder of Philosophical Counseling United States, executive director and co-founder of the National Philosophical Counseling Association, president of the Logic-Based Therapy and Consultation Institute. Dr. Cohen is also the author of dozens of articles and books. His most recent publications are Cognitive Behavior Interventions for Self-Defeating Thoughts, Helping Clients to Overcome the Tyranny of I Can't, published by Routledge in August of 2021, and Cognitive Behavior Therapy for Those Who Say They Can't, a workbook for overcoming your self-defeating thoughts, published by Routledge in 2022. Please help me give a warm welcome to my closest friend and mentor, Dr. Elliot Cohen.
Thank you very much, Sam. Let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay, is my screen visible? It is. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay, great. So let me start slideshow, and I'm going to put this here. Okay. All right. So good. You can see it, the whole full screen. Does it work? Okay. All right. The topic that I'm going to discuss here is overcoming burnout in nurses using logic-based group therapy, LBGT. And as was mentioned in the previous session, this is new ground, for LBT. So this is going to provide a model group therapy plan. And the idea of working with nurses who are suffering from burnout came as a result of work that I had done in a hospital with nurses and also physicians, and I had given a workshop on perfectionism and and healthcare, perfectionism and healthcare. And one of the issues that came up was burnout, and burnout is largely based on perfectionistic ideas. So there's a high incidence of individuals who demand perfection that get burned out. And after the, during and in this aftermath of the COVID pandemic, there was so much stress, on nurses, and especially nurses, because if you know anything about the way hospitals run, the nurses largely run the hospitals. I mean, they're the ones that are, on the front line all constantly. And I gave a set of criteria about burnout. We've got 10 of them, and everyone there just checked off all 10, saying we feel it. We're experiencing that the burnout, and this is serious business. So the idea of using LBT, in group therapy here seemed, quite important, to start working on. And I've done some other preliminary studies in therapy in a group setting to provide further evidence that this is not only needed, but it can has potential for being efficacious. So a lot of this is forward moving, looking for further projects, and I'm in the midst currently of setting up a project with another hospital setting where I will implement this group, and perhaps at the recenter, it might be a good venture as well. So why treat burnout? I think I've said a good deal about this already, but Burnout is a syndrome resulting from chronic stress at work that has deleterious psychological, physical, and occupational effects. What are those effects? Well, they include hypercholesterolemia, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, musculoskeletal pain, prolonged fatigue, headaches, gastrointestinal issues, respiratory problems, severe severe injuries and mortality below the age of 45 years, insomnia, depression, use of psychotropic and antidepressant medications, hospitalization for mental disorders, job dissatisfaction, absenteeism, and new disability pensions. So this is all based on careful empirical studies, linking burnout to those types of syndromes. So obviously the result is to diminish the well-being and health of nurses, as well as their effectiveness in caring for their patients. So what type of group is this? The group utilizes the 6-step method of LBGT or plain LBT, including a didactic psychoeducational component, teaching participants about the interactive nature of cognition, affect, and behavior. And clearly, it's for nurses who are suffering from burnout. There are tests that you could provide that inventories to determine whether an individual has burnout. But nurses pretty much know when they are burnt out. And this is we're talking about applying it to nurses, but that doesn't exclude others who are in high risk burnout areas as well. And I think physicians, for example, another group, who would qualify, for that as well. So what is logic-based therapy? What are some of the keynotes of it here that are relevant to our discussion? Well, you can stress yourself out and burn yourself out by deducing self-destructive conclusions from irrational premises or fallacies in your emotional reasoning, the thought process you go through when you are experiencing intense emotions. That's a rather simple definition of what emotional reasoning is. There's more complex ones. And I'm looking forward to Dr. Laban's talk where he talks about, and we'll talk about emotional reasoning further. These fallacies can be cataloged, identified, refuted, and counteracted with guiding virtues you develop by reframing your life challenges according to your own uplifting philosophies, chosen from a diverse range of philosophies, ancient to modern, East and West. These philosophies are helpful in building virtue and overcoming irrational thinking only when they resonate with your own philosophical rights and therefore cannot usefully be imposed on you by anyone else. So a really important keynote of LBT is that LBT provides multifarious types of uplifting philosophies, but they may not be, one philosophy may not be uplifting for one client, but rather for another. And so it's not appropriate to force feed philosophies. Philosophical counseling, and I think this is philosophical counseling of any stripes, really won't work if you try to impose or force feed a philosophy. And I think that's really important. So one of the things that early on the criticism that I got was that well, LBT has all these philosophies and they're not consistent with each other. Well, that's because people, clients are not consistent with each other. Then when you work within the belief systems of clients, you need to address what works for the client, not what works for the therapist. Because it's not about the therapist, it's about the client. So what are these six steps of LBT? Very briefly, and there's not enough time to go into these in depth here, but to exemplify as best possible in the group setting, I will do that. The step one is to identify the emotional reasoning. Step two is to check for fallacies in the premises. Step three is to refute any fallacies. Step four is to find the guiding virtue for each fallacy. And step five here is to find an uplifting philosophy for the guiding virtue. Step six is to apply the philosophies. Okay, so those are, the six steps here of philosophical counseling. And as far as the structure of the group is concerned, the group consists of 8 weekly sessions, each lasting 2 hours. It is a closed group since the didactic elements build on prior sessions, and permitting others to join the group after it starts would put these newcomers at a disadvantage and distract from the other participants concentrating on their own progress. So there's really 2 types of groups here. You could have an open and a closed group. The closed group would be one where you have a fixed number of individuals participants joining the group, and you don't let anybody else in. In open groups, as people leave, you bring in others. This is the format of this proposed group is that of a closed group, because if you allow others to come in, it could impede the cohesiveness and sense of safety and making personal disclosures as well. And you want a group that, in which it feels safe to disclose, and when there's others that are constantly coming in, you have to continue to build the cohesiveness. So I think this is the best format for the group in question. Group participation is voluntary, and I think 15 nurses in the group would make sense. Yalom, for instance, suggests an ideal about 11 or 12. If you start with 15, you've got to figure that there's going to be some attrition, some few dropping out. And so, the projection here is that we, would end up with a good lot. You don't want it too many, and you don't want it too few. Too few, you lose the opportunity for group interaction, which is, as we'll see, the main vehicle of change in the group. Nurses joining the group should be motivated to join because they want to change, not because they are required to attend. The latter is disempowering and might merely feed the very feelings that are contributing to burnout. Indeed, there's empirical evidence that a sense of disempowerment is a characteristic feature of burnout in the first place. So you don't want to disempower, the group members. In fact, you want to do the opposite. All right. So what are the psychodynamics of logic-based group therapy? And I see these dynamics are pretty much the dynamics of most or virtually all groups that make the group a very powerful device for helping to promote constructive change. The roles of the group leader consist of being didactic, facilitative, and promotive of group cohesiveness, trust, and safety. Works primarily in the here and now, talks about what's going on in the group and what happened previously in the group, and as you'll see through homework assignments, what occurred during those homework assignments. It's not looking back typically to the past lives of the clients, although some of that might enter into it, but not as an emphasis. Monitoring group interactivity, serving as role models for empathy, non-judgmental, or so-called unconditional positive regard, using the language of Carl Rogers, and authenticity. The roles of the group members, on the other hand, are to serve as a primary vehicle of constructive change. And that is done through providing feedback to each other, sharing and acknowledging each other's own feelings non-judgmentally. And non-judgmentally is very important. You want a group that doesn't judge individuals, doesn't damn individuals. That's a very important dimension of rational motor behavior therapy, and logic-based therapy, which is the offspring of the latter, of the former, excuse me. Reality testing and group disconfirmation of unreality. So you can imagine a participant talking about how he sees himself as valueless because he was rejected. The group, having been versed, in the irrationality of damnation, would be able to, self-damnation in this case, would be able to provide feedback. So that would be disconfirmed. And the disconfirmation that one gets from a group participant is much, especially a number of group participants, is much stronger, than just the one therapist. Okay, and these are one's peers too, you see. And so there's likely to be greater resonance here, and also development of universal sharing of experiences. In other words, we're all on the same page. We understand, hey, this sort of a catharsis too, realizing that I'm not the only one doing this, and we all understand, how irrational this is, and so this dimension of group, here is extremely, I think, powerful to move the techniques of logic-based therapy forward, because you're not only getting corroboration from the therapist and support from the therapist, you're getting it from the whole group. And you don't want a situation where the therapist treats each individual, atomistically, within the group, takes turns working with each client. That would short circuit this power, that you can actually get, from the context of group therapy. So the dynamics of group therapy is extremely important. The group process involves group members creating a microcosm of their outside lives in group, including conflicts with others through mechanism of transference. So conflict is manageable conflict anyway is a good thing. You want that, to happen. When that conflict happens, then, you get feedback, but that can only occur, in an environment that's safe. And we'll talk more about that. And then what happens is for the group process is this dynamic in the group, this microcosm of their outside lives then is applied, to their outside lives, so then they start working on the relationships outside, of the group context. And following Yalom, much has to do with relationships. Many problems you see that people have can and oftentimes be boiled down, to the relationships they have with others. And LBT is really, provides some really strong skill concepts that can be applied to interpersonal relationships. So I think, there's a kind of win-win situation here with regard to working on interpersonal relationships in a group and applying, the techniques of LBT within that concept, within that construct. So now, what are the group goals? The overarching goal, obviously, would be to reduce burnout, in acute care nurses. The sub-goals of the group, by which that primary, goal would be achieved, are to acquire knowledge of how certain types of emotional reasoning create self-defeating emotions and behavior, identify one's own emotional reasoning and the fallacies, that is the irrational thinking contained in its premises, refute these fallacies using applied logic, construct a set of counteractive guiding virtues, adopt an empowering, virtuous philosophy to motivate the set of guiding virtues, identify and select various types of cognitive behavioral techniques to apply the virtuous philosophy, apply these techniques through group activities and homework assignments. So session 1 now would involve the group facilitator and members introducing themselves and briefly describing their working environments. Oftentimes, a kind of icebreaker is suggested that, you maybe talk about something funny or something that people can feel relaxed and, and share without feeling threatened. So that's a possibility as well, here. But importantly, I think the group facilitator and members should introduce themselves and talk about, their working environments so that everybody is sort of on the same page with respect to what each is doing. Group participants mutually agree on the norms that will apply to the group, such as confidentiality, self-disclosure, timely and consistent attendance, and not judging others. And wherever possible to promote, the group itself, coming to these conclusions and setting their own norms. There's certain norms that are non-negotiable, like confidentiality and self-disclosure. Self-disclosure not of the facilitator or the therapist there, but rather self-disclosure of the participants in the group, because that's a major vehicle by which change is going to occur. If there's no self-disclosure, then it's not likely that there's going to be any constructive change occurring. Confidentiality is important because it basically says what's in the group stays in the group. Now, confidentiality raises some issues in group that go beyond, the individual counseling setting, because you've got more people, involved, and it's more difficult to control. But it's important to emphasize, confidentiality here, that, people are disclosing things that are personal, and you don't go out and disclose them to other people outside the group. So that needs to be emphasized. Attendance is also important. If the attendance is poor, that's going to be discouraging to the group, and the group is going to get disenchanted. So these are very important. And very importantly, too, is not judging others. That's a very important vehicle for promoting safety, because if people, are afraid that they're going to be called names and criticized as persons, and there's a difference between criticizing a person, and talking about, what they're thinking or what they're doing. They, you're stupid, for instance, is different than saying, what you're doing is self-defeating. And so we want to avoid, high-powered emotive language. The group facilitator can be very, helpful in setting, a model for that. The group goal, is introduced, that is to, reduce burnout through the LBT process. Visible here, or is my screen visible still? Because I'm
Not anymore. No, you phased out.
how is it now?
There's no screen except for the thumbnails.
It's getting worse. On a moment here. All right, let me try resharing my screen, because this doesn't seem to be. I don't understand why I lost the. How's it now? Can you see my screen? Hello? Can you
Hey,
hear me?
we can't see you. We can see you now.
I don't know. I think there's some technology issues going on here because it's nothing that I'm doing on my end. Can you see the session, the screen of the PowerPoint?
No, not yet.
You can't. How about now?
No, sir.
You can't see the PowerPoint?
Oh, yeah, I think we're almost there. There we go.
Okay.
Session one.
All right. Okay, good. I'm sorry about this. I don't know why it's doing this, but okay. So you're going to define the key terms such as burnout, logic-based therapy, emotional reasoning, fallacy, etc. The group participants receive didactic instruction about how physiological, cognitive, and behavioral processes interact with each other, that emotions have cognitive, physiological, and behavioral components, and that all or most emotional responses have cognitive components. The Stoic idea is introduced that it's not events that upset people, but rather their judgments about them. So those are some important concepts. Session 2 would involve identifying the cardinal fallacies here. And the participants receive didactic instruction on LBT's cardinal fallacies, including demanding perfection, catastrophizing, bandwagon reasoning, world revolves around me thinking, constipation, etc. And a handout is provided, and you could perhaps see a handout like this one here. Handout. All right, this provides, the different types of cardinal fallacies in logic-based therapy. So what we would do here is hand that out, and the participants would have an opportunity to study those fallacies so that they get a grasp, what they are. Explanation is provided about how these fallacies arise in the premises of emotional reasoning. Examples are provided of some of the fallacies that have been linked to burnout, such as perfectionism and self-damnation. For example, I must always do a perfect job at work, but I have made mistakes with my patients. Therefore, I'm no good or incompetent, a phony or a charlatan. A handout is also provided of commonplace self-defeating emotional reasoning templates. Participants share their work experiences and provide feedback to each other about their emotional reasoning, utilizing the instruction they receive in identifying self-defeating types of emotional reasoning. And then session 3 would involve learning, the concept of refuting irrational thinking. Participants are instructed on types of refutation, that is, how to show that a particular pattern of thinking is irrational. These include showing that the thinking pattern leads to inconsistencies. For example, I must always be in control, but this is not possible. Lack evidence. For example, where is it written that I must always get the approval of others? Engenders double standards. For example, I think I'm a failure when I make a mistake, but I don't think my peers are failures when they make mistakes. Or self-defeating consequences. I stress myself out, which prevents me from making sound decisions. So there's, several different types of refutation processes that they learn here from a didactic perspective, and then we work on applying them. Participants share their irrational emotional reasoning and receive feedback from the group in applying the didactic lesson on types of refutation. So there's a really strong emphasis on the applying it to your everyday thinking, refuting the irrational ideas that occur, in your thinking within the group context. And the group carries, the thrust of this, but they're the ones that provide the feedback, not the therapist specifically. but rather the group participants. Session 4, the guiding virtues. Participants receive instruction on how each of the different cardinal fallacies have a guiding virtue that counters it. For example, demanding perfection has the guiding virtue of metaphysical security. That is, security about the imperfections in reality, and courage has the guiding virtue of catastrophizing. A handout is provided as well here, and let me see if I can do a handout. And so this would be an example of a handout where you see demanding perfection and the specific counteractive guiding virtue for each of these bandwagon: authenticity, the world around me, empathy, awfulizing or catastrophizing, courage, damnation, respect, anticipation, control, and the different types of self-control. Dutiful worrying, prudence, manipulation, empowerment, oversimplifying, objectivity, distorting probabilities, foresightedness in assessing probabilities, blind conjecture, scientificity in providing explanations. So those are the major relationships between the guiding virtues and the cardinal fallacies. The importance of metaphysical security and unconditional self-acceptance, that is self-respect, as antidotes to perfectionism and self-damnation is explained given the link these two fallacies bear to burnout. And I mentioned earlier that there's a real strong empirical connection there. Participants identify and discuss their own fallacies and their guiding virtues and receive feedback from each other. Then in session 5, we have, the reframing emotional reasoning using uplifting philosophies. This is where we start moving, to step 5 of the process of LBT. The facilitator provides didactic instruction on the power of personal philosophies to build guiding virtues. This involves reframing irrational emotional reasoning in terms of one's constructive philosophical views about how to be virtuous. Participants are then asked to express their individual virtuous philosophies by asking open-ended questions about them. For example, what makes a person self-respecting? What makes a person courageous? What makes a person secure about the imperfections in reality? Who is the most self-respecting person you know? What makes them so self-respecting? The facilitator is free to relate the traditions of philosophy to participants' views. For example, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant had a similar view as yours. He said that people are to be valued for their own sake and not to be manipulated or used by others or even by themselves. So when you said that your friend is self-respecting because he doesn't let others take advantage of him, you are agreeing with Kant. The group accordingly weighs in and provides feedback to each other. These questions that are asked are going to generate different perspectives, and those can be, related, to different philosophical stances that could resonate respectively with the participants, so that there's not just one size, again, fitting all. Here's an example of a philosophy that might come up. How can Buddhism make you feel more secure about the loss of life? Reality is impermanent: birth, aging, sickness, dissociation from the loved, not getting what one wants, and in general, things affected by clinging lead to painful consciousness. First noble truth of Buddhism. So really what it suggests here is letting go of the demand to save everyone. So nurses, have this demand: I must do everything possible to save this person. And maybe they think they didn't do everything possible. This contradiction between what must be and what isn't creates a lot of this anxiety and distress. And Buddhism basically tells you to let go of this because things aren't permanent like that. That's not the way it works in reality. This can help generate greater metaphysical security. And so it isn't just to instill this in, as a lecture, but it's to help each of the group members to internalize these kinds of concepts so that they can help each other out. How can Epictetus philosophy build security about not always being in control? So Epictetus, as we, most of us or all of us know, says that some things are in our control and others not. Things in our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever are our own actions. Things not in our control are body, property, reputation, command, and in one word, whatever are not our own actions. So this suggests that one let go of the demand for perfect compliance and medical outcomes, certainty in diagnostics, and approval by everyone on your team. So these are likely, philosophies to generate, discussion in this direction. And it's, one possibility here, you can try different approaches. In some cases, one might consider throwing out a philosophy to see if it works for anybody. If it doesn't, then you don't use it. Okay, so the homework assignments are part of the session 5 as well. And one is to reinforce unconditional self-acceptance or self-respect here. Participants are given a shame attacking exercise to perform over the next week. Shame attacking exercise is a popular technique that's used in rational motive behavior therapy and some versions of CBT as well. This means doing something that leads other people to disapprove of them in some way. For example, this is an example that Albert Ellis, my mentor, gave, pulling a banana on a string down a crowded street, and then being asked to identify their irrational thinking patterns and to refute them. So, if you're demanding approval, then you try to do something that you'll generate some disapproval, and then you work with the disapproval, using the techniques of LBT, including imagery, which I'll talk about shortly, which is part of the group activity. Participants are asked to practice refuting and reframing their irrational emotional reasoning using their philosophies during and after they have performed the shame attacking exercise. They're also asked to practice applying their philosophies when they face challenges at work, for example, when they find themselves being down on themselves. So not only in imagination, but also, in vivo, can you apply, these techniques? And imagination can be very powerful, as I suggest. Here's where I talk about that, adding imagery to overcome irrational thinking. And this is session 6. The facilitator gives participants a chance to talk about their shame attacking exercise. Participants are also given time to discuss their experiences last week in refuting and reframing their irrational thinking using their philosophies. The facilitator facilitates participants offering their feedback, shared universal experiences, and unconditional positive regard. Participants share their feedback with each other and provide positive reinforcement to those who did the assignments while maintaining a non-judgmental attitude to those who have not yet shared their experiences. The facilitator introduces other supportive evidence-based techniques to work on overcoming irrational patterns of emotional reasoning, such as use of rational motive imagery. This involves practicing imagery, imagining an event that has been associated with a negative emotion. Then, while experiencing the emotion, identifying the irrational thought pattern and reframing it using an empowering philosophy. And for those of you who've gone through the process of training in LBT, you probably experienced, the power of imagery, which I often use for clients. The facilitator invites volunteers to be guided through the process by the facilitator, and participants offer their feedback and support. So this is, partly didactic, where they learn, the technique of imagery, and then they get to practice it. in their own lives and helping each other to practice it. Participants are given the assignment to practice imagery during the upcoming week. Participants share in session 7, which involves adding mindfulness, their experiences with practicing rational motive imagery, and those who have not tried it yet are invited to try it out in the group. Participants provide feedback and positive reinforcement to those who have volunteered. A didactic lesson on the use of mindfulness meditation is provided by the facilitator. And you could actually bring in an individual who in the group itself. Sometimes group members will have, who have done meditation, and they might, and that could be also a powerful way of bringing in meditation. Doing this as a further technique for overcoming negative emotions due to irrational thought patterns. The group is then guided through a session of mindful meditation where they are instructed to focus on a particular object and to gently push away any thoughts that arise during the process out of their consciousness. Participants share their thoughts about mindfulness and what their experience was like. The facilitator gives participants a homework assignment to practice mindfulness meditation each day as a convenient time, at a convenient time of day. The facilitator also provides participants with a reference to an online mindfulness meditation course that would allow them to continue developing their meditative skills upon termination of the group. And in particular, the link is provided to John Kabat-Zinn's free 8-week online mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And there are others, but I found this one to be rather useful in working with clients. So that's not carved in stone, but it is a useful suggestion, I think. Session 8 involves terminating the group therapy, and this is a very important session. Group members are going to have strong bonds with each other. If the group works, that's what we hope, will happen. Participants share their experiences using mindfulness, imagery, refutation, and cognitive reframing and shame attacking exercises during the past weeks. Talk about, where they were and where they are now, with respect to the main goal of, overcoming burnout. Participants provide each other with feedback and unconditional positive regard. The facilitator emphasizes the idea that constructive change is an ongoing process, and the skills obtained through the group need to be practiced and applied daily going forward. A review is conducted of progress made during group and significant events toward progress. This is a time when the universality of shared experience cements the bond that participants have forged in the 8-week period. There is an ending ritual appropriate for the group, for example, a pizza party, and processing of the meaning and significance of this ritual, such as celebrating the progress made in group toward overcoming burnout. So that's it. The rest of it are, some references that I've compiled for this purposes of this presentation. So I will now stop sharing my screen.
Thank you for that presentation, Elliot. It's really, really interesting. We have about 15 minutes for questions.
Great.
While people are thinking of questions, I have just a couple for you. Would you ever do this group via Zoom?
That's a good question. I would be willing to try it. I would be willing to try it. I've had good success working, with clients via, telehealth, and I would be willing to try it. But that's a question I, would reserve time to think about, a little further.
Yeah, I have a comment. I think if I had to hazard it, I would love to do it if and only if I could meet with the people first in person and then have it keep on going and teleremote. That's I found a less attrition rate if people bond at the beginning in person. And that's I only have experience with business organizations, for instance, trying to revamp their mission statement. So they're all lining each other with a common cause. And usually the mission statement realignment has something to do with stress reduction, which is dealing with burnout that they've seen in their business as well. But that definitely a first bond seems to get the ball going. And that's just my 2 cents.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a good point. I mean, before the group, in order to form the group, the facilitator needs to meet individually, with the clients to determine whether they're appropriate, for the group. So, there may be some nurses that are just not appropriate for it. They're, maybe they just don't, they're uncooperative in various ways, or they're not really burnt out and they want to use it for something else, or so there could be multiple reasons why they're not suitable for the group. But so there needs to be, some meeting, individually. If it's done online, entirely, then those individual meetings would also presumably be online too. But and that I think the group would be probably best done, face to face. But we've done some interesting stuff, online as well. So I wouldn't rule that out. So that was a good question, Sam.
Can I ask a question?
Sure. Andre, go ahead.
You talked about the microcosmos, and now that the facilitator decides who goes into the group. Now, this microcosmos can be one that is very biased in one direction. So does the facilitator take special care or measures in picking people so that the group has some variety of mentalities, so that they don't end up in a very narrow group bias?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That is to say, you want individuals who have, different perspectives from the start. Otherwise, the group gets kind of loaded, in one direction or another, and then you miss the opportunity for that, that tension, and there's a conflict that's useful, because if there's no disagreement, and everybody's kumbaya, patting each other on the back, the opportunity for growth and change is limited. So I think that's a good point. Yeah, that could be, addressed, in constructing the group, putting the group together at the outstart. Mm-hmm. Very good. Thanks.
So then how do you select them? Based on the fallacies that hurt them very much, or what is the criterion?
Well, I think there's going to be some common denominators. Of course, the criteria for selecting group members would be, are they suffering from burnout? I mean, that would be the main one. And if they are, then you get kind of a sense of, what they're telling you, or what sort of irrational thinking that they have, and so forth. So it would be kind of getting a sense of what is moving, their burnout, what sort of issues and problems that they have. I don't think that one should be, presumptive about things, because, if you try to control the selection process too much, then it's artificial as well. But the main criterion for selection of group members would be, not really that many positive ones. They're more rule out criteria than rule in. The rule in is largely, are you suffering from burnout? The rule out are, is this person, going to be a problem with it? Or do they have commitments, for instance, that will prevent them from meeting the group? If they travel a lot, are they going to be, an absentee risk? That would be a consideration, for not including, one in the group. So, do they have the problem? That's the rule in. Do they have something that's going to prevent them from, being a constructive member of the group? That's the rule out criteria.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat from Matthew to everyone. He says that there's been a fair amount of empirical research on the effectiveness of video conferencing individual and group psychotherapy that suggests that with appropriate framing, VC work is as effective at follow-up intervals. This literature may be at least relevant in LBGT by video conferencing.
Yeah, I'm aware of some of the research, and I think that's a good remark. That's why I was willing, to try it, because there is some evidence, to that effect. Yeah, thanks so much, Matthew. Yeah.
We have a hand. Ross has his hand up.
Yeah, Ross.
Oh, yes. Yes. Hello, Elliot.
Hey there.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciated it.
Great.
My question has to do with building trust in the group.
Mhm.
Maybe if you could just possibly speak a little more about how you do that.
Yeah, I think some of the things that I emphasized here, like the non-judgmental attitude, that the people are not there to knock each other out and to criticize and put each other down. That's very, very important. The idea that it's an environment where you can connect with it, people can recognize and validate your feelings, and instead of telling you, you don't have a right to your feelings, and helping individuals, to feel comfortable with the fact that what they're saying isn't going to be spoken outside. This is very important with professionals, because they have reputations, and they don't want, what they say on a personal level, to be spoken outside of the group. So that has to be really emphasized. What's said in the group is confidential. I think too, there's other issues that can arise. What happens sometimes in groups is that people get to be friends with each other, and they start talking outside the group to each other. And what that does is distract, from the group, because then they might be saying things to each other that they're not saying to the group. So then the group doesn't have an opportunity, to hear, what's going on. So if they do make friends with each other, you can't tell them you can't. But if they do, then they have to understand that what they say outside, they need to be prepared to say inside the group too, so to share with everybody else. So everybody is on the same page. That's how you create, this trust, where everybody is willing to share and to not judge each other, to acknowledge the feelings that they have, to share universal feelings, and experiences that can be very, bonding as well. So those are, some of the key elements. And if you study group here, you see that, there's certain elements, of group, that are essential. And those are some of the essential ones, that help to promote safety. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elliot.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
You're on mute, Sam. Can't hear you. Okay, good.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions for Dr. Cohen. Maybe I'll just make a comment. I've noticed that my wife's a nurse and she suffered from burnout, but it was not only the work environment, but also their administrators and immediate supervisors that made it worse by not being empathetic.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Yeah. And that's part of the problem, you know, and the demand for approval too, and to satisfy all the team members. And, you know, it can become quite a mess, you know,
Yeah.
with people's. I mean, I saw it up close and personal, you know, and it's problematic, you know.
Yeah. Well, any last remarks, Dr. Cohen?
Well, I intend to pursue these ideas further, and I think, you know, the discussion that we had prior to this meeting with Dr. LeBlanc's panel is an exciting opportunity, I think, to try some of this stuff out, you know, and see how it works. My goal is to work with nurses, but it doesn't have to be confined to nurses, and it could be a general group as well. So a general psychotherapy group or a philosophical psychotherapy group, there is a connection as we were talking, is a possibility as well. So one thing that I do plan to try on a limited basis in Timisoara when I come, one of the classes will be to try out a group, you know, a group setting, and so we'll see how that works as well.
We are looking forward to that.
Great.
I volunteered to be in a group.
Okay.
As, I don't consider myself a guinea pig.
Yeah. I don't think it's quite being a guinea pig. I mean, there's enough empirical evidence to suggest, you know, one of the close relationship between CBT and LBT. There have been, you know, tons of empirical studies that, you know, show that CBT group CBT actually works, and LBT goes beyond, you know, the CBT, as we know, by introducing the aspirational and philosophical dimensions into it. But and of course, the whole is not the same as the parts, you know. So and the parts are not the same as the whole. So just because the CBT elements work doesn't mean broader perspective works. So there, you know, there is some experimentation going on here in terms of, you know, is how successful it's going to be. I feel confident that CBT in groups is the future of CBT. That the individual aspects of it are nothing compared to what, you know, the group context can afford, and that's because the when you have more than one individual who is internalizing this kind of stuff and working with the group, I think that suggests really great possibilities for change. And I've had experience working with students, you know, working with the faulty thinking errors, you know, and having students internalize them and being able to try them out on each other and on themselves. and with great success, actually. So that's some preliminary findings of mine that, from a clinical perspective, well, from a student perspective, not so much clinical, but I think these are, promising beginnings, but we'll see. Okay, court's still out.
All right, thank you so much. Dr. Cohen, we have you scheduled to chair the next session. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay.